two. All right, all right. What up? What up out there, C10 Nation? We got a little truck talk with Norris Marshall, Mr. Blueprint Engines, and Norris. I appreciate you taking time today. I can't wait to talk about everything Blueprint. I did have the cheating a little bit here. I watched the Oil and Whiskey with you. You were on with the boys, with Josh and Jeremy and Phil. What a good time! What a good time! How's things up in Nebraska?
Hey, it's really pretty good in Nebraska. It's turning into fall as we talk now, so it's cooling down a little bit. Our extreme heat from the summer is slowing down, and it's a great time to be here. Nebraska certainly sees all four seasons, and this is probably my favorite part of the year.
My buddy lives in Grand Island, which isn't far from Kearney, from where you're at. And the one thing he always said, I remember he said, I've been into Grand Island a few times. He said, in Nebraska, you can watch your dog run away for 3 days straight because it's so damn flat.
Yeah, well, that's true where we're at. That is absolutely true. It's a town of 35,000 people in the middle of cornfields.
Wow. Wow. Now in Arizona, when it's funny, we look so forward to the fall. People they can't get their pumpkin lattes out and their UGG boots, and even if it's still hot out, because they know what's coming, the great weather for us. For you guys, is it the opposite? Do you get a little gun shy because it's going to be windy and cold, or how is it out in Nebraska?
It's amazing. It's been a long, long time since the Cornhuskers were very successful at football, but the fervor is still there. And so that's what everybody in Nebraska is thinking about right now is football season's around the corner. And
Yeah.
they'll be excited about that until there's about 4 or 5 losses, and then we start getting depressed. But right now, we got all the hope in the world.
Well, yeah, you're right. Football season's just around the corner. So that means good weather and tailgating and all that good stuff. So, all right, let's get into Blueprint. I love your story. Let's start from the top. I think one of my favorite stories is when you had to call Jack Roush, and we'll start from there.
Okay, that's cool. That's the kind of the story of my first engine that I ever built. I grew up on a farm, and I did the farm chore deal and did the tractor driving and did all that, but I really liked spending time in the shop. My dad had converted a chicken coop into a workshop for me, and that was my own shop. It wasn't, didn't amount to much, but it had a bench and a cement floor. And back then, before the kind of media that we had today, you got magazines. And I got Carcraft magazine, I got Hot Rod magazine. You just couldn't wait to get those magazines every month. And I remember being 15 years old, Ronnie, and I got a Hot Rod magazine that had a story in it about a 302 Ford engine that Jack Roush was kind of explaining in the story how to build this and what it amounted to. It was a it was a conversion. You take a regular 302 Windsor and you could turn it into a 302 Boss. And the way you did that, according to the article, was with 351 Cleveland heads, with some different connecting rods, with some Boss pistons, Boss intake manifold. So he spelled it all out. It was really clear, and I thought, man, that's what I want to do. I'm 15 years old. I want to build this engine. So didn't have a driver's license, couldn't drive. So my mom would haul me around. We found some Cleveland heads at a salvage yard about 40 minutes away, and found a 302 Windsor engine, a used one in the newspaper for probably $75. So I got all the parts, took everything apart, took it to a machine shop, took the magazine article to the machine shop and said, this is what I want to build. So they did the machine work on the block, ground the crank and bored the block and did all that, redid the heads. You had to reroute the water a little bit because of where the water comes out of a Cleveland. And I got all done, and I had the parts, I had the machine work done, but I did not have an intake manifold because there were only two available. Edelbrock had an intake manifold brand new, and Ford had made 302 Boss intakes. So I couldn't afford the Edelbrock, and I think I'd heard in the magazine that the 302 Boss intake was good. So I thought I'm going to call Jack Roush and see if he's got a used intake manifold. And back then, again, it's pre-computer, so you had a phone number you dialed that you got information. And some gal would answer the phone and you'd say, I'm 15 years old. I need the phone number for Jack Rouse in Livonia, Michigan. And she gave me the phone number. So I called it. I said, I need to talk to Jack Rouse. She came on the phone. I said, hey, I built this engine out of this magazine article, but I need an intake manifold. And he said, well, I'll sell you an intake manifold for $75. And it came COD. My mom paid for it. And that intake manifold is still on top of that engine. And that's been a long, long time ago. That was 1977. The engine sits in our lobby today, and it's been cleaned up and painted. But I put that engine in a 69 Ford pickup without knowing. I was a kid, man. I just didn't know what I was doing at all, but had way too big a cam in it. It sounded just like the cars going down the drag strip when I take it out on the paved road, open headers. And that was my daily driver when I was in high school for a little while.
Well, you talk a little bit about dad, turning the chicken coop into the shop. Mom is carting you around. I mean, just amazing that she's such a big part of this in this story. Did the kids just did the or I guess did the parents just know like there's something I got to keep Norris out of trouble because there's only one thing bored boys get into and that's trouble. So they're stimulating. They something got you in those magazines, and did they just realize, hey, this kid's mechanical, or was it a little bit of both? Where I got to keep him out of trouble. He's in there. We gave him a little bit of a space, and really you just got bit hard by that mechanical bug, and your parents were there to foster that.
Yeah, my parents were in agriculture and in the auction business. But the beginning of all of it was like in the 50s. My dad was a prototypical 1950s hot rodder. He was in Nebraska, and he was kind of jealous of the guys in California because they'd get all the magazines and see what the California guys were doing. But dad had a 29 highboy roadster with a flathead V8 motor in it. He had the flat top haircut when he graduated in 1955. I mean, he looked just like, what you'd think of as a hot rodder. And he went on and did some drag racing, and he did some circle track racing. And then he had a family and kind of had to, grow up and make a living. So when I came along, some of the remnants of those vehicles were just laying around, but the hobby was over for dad. He was busy working and making a living, but I heard all those stories, and that was a connection I always had with my dad, that he was a hot rodder and I wanted to be a hot rodder. And so that was where the fire came from, the spark that lit that flame. And then the other thing both my parents always told me is, Norris, you can do anything you want. And that wasn't that was encouragement, right? They said, you go whatever direction you want to go. We have confidence in you. And that's a real gift from any parent, that they have some confidence that you can go. And then you're also right. I did get in a lot of trouble as a high schooler. So I'm sure they were happy to feed anything that didn't look like empty beer cans on the side of the road.
Well, small town living, it's one of those things where did you ever feel like because you also were getting those magazines, you also had that passion. Did you ever feel limited because you were in Nebraska? Did that motivate you? Did that frustrate you? Did you feel like, hey, I'm small towns and I can't be this big?
I think back then, and maybe still today, probably not as much today, but when Dad was there, the center of the universe was LA and Southern Cal, and even for me, it was either that or North Carolina with stock car racing. So yeah, I did feel like I was in the wrong place a little bit and didn't have the same opportunities that I would have had if I had been somewhere else. But you just take what you have and go with it, right? You don't spend a lot of time. I've never spent a lot of time thinking about the bad part. I just think about the good part. What can we do? What is next? What's going on?
Yeah, well, you did. And so then you get into shop and then you kind of have a shop teacher. How did you get to uh, starting the business?
So probably about the time when I built that first engine, instead of working on the farm in the summertime, I started working in repair shops in town. The first job I had was a small town repair shop. They worked on trucks and tractors and lawnmowers, and they mentored me on working on lawnmowers. So again, I got my mom taking me to work every day in the summertime. They're teaching me how to read microfiche and look up parts for Briggs and Stratton engines. And that was the beginning. And the next summer, I worked at a different shop, maybe learned how to pull some heads and do a valve job or something like that. And finally, that culminated in high school. My senior year, I worked in the back of a parts store in the machine shop. And I learned how to do valve jobs and grind cranks and bore blocks and turn brake drums and hot tank blocks and all that. Halfway through my senior year, the machinist quit. and they just had me. And my boss said, I think you got her covered. So here I am, a senior in high school, theoretically running this machine shop with a lot of help from my boss. But so that was the launch of the engine career. Uh, I learned that trade and tried going to college for a couple semesters. Didn't even complete two. I got one done and decided I really wanted to be in business for myself. I had a lot of entrepreneurial drive. Uh, Took $3,500 loan and bought a boring bar and hand hone and built a hot tank and bought some valve grinding equipment. And essentially in 1982, opened my own machine shop at the age of 20. Did that for a little while. Ended up getting 3 or 4 employees within 2 or 3 years. And I looked around, Ronnie, and I'm 23 years old, and I've got one of the biggest machine shops I'd ever seen. And I thought this is going to get kind of boring for the next 40 years or whatever. So the business just kept evolving, and we went from that to buying used engines, rebuilding them, putting them in the newspaper, selling them, and doing production engine building. Uh, in the very beginning, we were doing racing engines in that machine shop, and kind of stepped away from that and said, let's go where the volume is. And uh, did production engine remanufacturing was what it was called. And that carried us through to the mid 2000s. And that got to be a pretty good sized business. But ultimately, cars and engines were made better. Fuel injection, even airbags affected that industry. Um, you My dad used to wear out a pickup in 60,000 miles, and nobody wanted to buy a 100,000-mile vehicle. And it got so that people were pulling used engines out of the junkyard with 150,000 miles and putting them back in their kid's car and go 100,000 miles more. So that engine rebuilding, that thing kind of dried up. I always say it's kind of like Kodak film. It was big once and then it just went away. So we went back to our roots, and the roots were, let's build some racing motors, let's build some streetcar motors. And that was really the beginning of Blueprint in the early 2000s. And that's what's carrying us forward now.
What a journey. And I always use the example for the audience, just bear with me, a kid that grew up born in the 70s and I grew up in the 80s. My shop teacher had the 8-track. And then I grew up buying cassettes, and then we saw the evolution of the CD, the disc, and then that went to, a shuffle, and obviously there's 45s and vinyl in there too. So my example is that now we don't have there's nothing, right? There's nothing tangible. Kids get online, it's all on the airwaves. Well, what an absolute, just, if you could like kind of time log all that. You're a young man, and you're learning. So before you know it, you're running a machine shop, and you're learning on old school Bridgeports. You've seen not only from a machinist, you've seen the automation, if you will, but think about the marketing. Think about, now you're in Nebraska, I'm here in Arizona. The Google, you talk about, like, to me it used to be 411. As a firefighter, people call 911, and sometimes they make mistakes. We've had people call 911 thinking they were calling 411, which was information back in the day. And you think, yellow pages, and ripping out, you go to a phone booth and you rip out this yellow piece of paper, or the old Auto Trader magazine. And I could see you guys having, it was always a joy to flip to the back and see what parts were for sale, or in the classified ads that would come every morning, or the Saturday classifieds. You got to get the Saturday one because it's got all the good shit. So you've seen, so really, the I guess, you think about the industrial, just the growth we've had, the industrial revolution. You've seen the revolution of marketing, people connecting, and you've been through the whole gamut of rebuilding and machining.
Yeah, you make me sound kind of old, Ronnie. So I'm not sure what to think
Oh,
about that. But
hey,
I
hey,
have seen a lot of change, and I'm just going to keep watching change. But at the end of the day, uh, we're in you reference marketing, and at the end of the day, we're trying to find a way to connect with people, and that part of marketing has never ever changed. And how you get connected, whether that's a direct mail piece like it was when I started, or an ad in the back of the magazine, or today it's Instagram and meta posts, it's still the same thing. We just have changed the method of connecting. So we're trying to connect with people. We're trying to tell our story. So I don't mind those changes. They don't bother me at all. And I don't get like, oh, that'll never work. Let's put an ad in the newspaper. That's just a delivery method. The messaging and how you create an emotional connection with the customer, that's the part that will never change. So yeah, how we get there, is it a MP3 player, or is it vinyl, or is it the disc or 8-track? That's just a device, right? It's the music that we're transferring. So that stuff doesn't bother me at all. And then as far as the engine technology and the manufacturing, I love learning, and I love the technology that's available in the engines today. I love learning about EFI and learning about direct injection, or if we're talking about machining, where today we have huge banks of CNC machines that do what I used to carry a boring bar around and bolt it onto the top of a block. I mean, that's cool. We're tired of carrying the boring bar around, so come on, CNC equipment, that's fine. It's just great to see what we can do.
Yeah, it really is. And man, you just nailed it. It's about the music. However, it's getting into your soul. It's getting into your soul. And like for you guys, you think about one of the things you said, I know on your previous interview, you were doing like 100, was it a week or a day,
A day.
rebuilds. Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
In the early 2000s, we were doing about 103 engines a day, rebuilding and selling those through independent Napa stores and CarQuest stores and people like that all around the country. And that industry at its peak was around 3 million engines a year. And I had 100 other peers in the country that did what I did. There were 100 companies doing production volume remanufacturing. And I watched that shrink to about 20 as we were exiting, because we knew there really wasn't going to be room for as much capacity as what we had. So that's when we said we got to find something else to do. And it's always had something to do with engines. From the very beginning, it was engines. It's still engines today, and it'll be engines as long as the world needs engines, because that's what I know. I've got a great staff of people. A lot of them have been here long enough to have been through that transition. They know engines. They've got experience from whether it was stock rebuilds, or experience from their racing hobby, or experience from what we do today. So it's going to stay engines.
How did you know to pivot? How did you know to pivot from rebuild to becoming a specialty and building, like you said, kind of a quote unquote race engine?
So I think that was not hard to figure out. I was going to auctions that my friends were having because they went broke. And I remember being at an auction and buying 2 or 3 camshaft grinding machines. And I thought, man, these are cheap. Nobody wants these. And then I realized that's what the ones I already own are worth too. Nobody wants mine. And that's it kind of made me realize, like, I don't think this has a very good end to it. And so I always say, it's like I watched a bunch of my friends go broke, and I was just trying to avoid that. I did not want to go broke continuing to do something that the world just didn't need anymore.
Wow. Yeah, and like you said, sometimes people just think keep driving, put your head down and just keep going, keep going. But you had the wherewithal to pivot, and it obviously worked out. And you might have got some good deals on your buddy's equipment that no longer were doing it. And then I could even see that being one of those things where you're like, hey, Rob, you want to come work for me because now you don't have a shop no more.
Yeah, it it wasn't a difficult decision to make, because you could see the market decline, and you could see that there wasn't going to be a future in it for most of the engine rebuilders. There was going to be a few survivors, and there are. But I remember telling my staff, it's like, okay, a year from now, we're not going to do any of this, and we're going to replace it with this other thing. And they're like, you're crazy. And I'm like, we don't have a choice. And it was probably about a 3-year transition. And I'd say during that 3 years, as we exited one market and tried to grow into another, we consistently lost money for 3 years, but we had the equity. We'd made money before, so we were just betting on the future. And I don't mind those kind of bets. I don't mind risk. I think I'm good at assessing risk, and the risk is might everybody has a different tolerance for risk. So my tolerance might be higher than others, but I don't think we ever really gamble the farm. It's a good safe bet.
Yeah. What a story. I know at one point I think you said you had over 200 employees when you guys were doing rebuilds.
Yeah, back at that peak, we had 270 employees. I think about 20 to 25 salesmen on the road, company-owned vehicles, calling on customers, turning in expense reports. Uh, was a 24-hour day operation. And after we pivoted to performance crate engines, that wound down to, I think, went from about 270 to about 120 employees over time until we started getting some traction. And now we're back up to about 270 employees, about 150 of them in the shop. We've got about 25 engineers, a bunch of really awesome customer service people, materials management, supply chain. So just the standard stuff that a manufacturing company would have.
How do you balance that? Because I want to get into motors, don't get me wrong, and engines, but um, I love the part where you're a one man 15-year-old all the way up to where you are now and the things you've changed that you've seen. Everybody I talk to that has business is just their employees are the headache. How do you balance that? And is Nebraska different because you're getting kids that grew up on the farm, you're getting young men and women that grew up working and know, hey, this is hard work, and you're going to put in hard work and you're going to be compensated. Expand on that a little bit.
Sure. I'd say Nebraska was different in the 80s and 70s. There's several other manufacturing plants in town that would tell you that when they started in the 70s, that they filled them up with farm boys that had a hell of a work ethic. But farms have gotten big. There's not as many farm kids as there used to be. So I still think we have a really good work ethic in Nebraska. Uh, I've visited other parts of the country, but I've never tried to employ people. I hear some horror stories from friends of mine that are in other parts. So I think that's a little bit easier. But also, Nebraska has a super low unemployment rate. Our county's probably under 1% and probably has been for the last 5 or 6 years. So we're fighting with the other manufacturing companies in town for production employees. When we get to engineers and managers, it really hasn't been very challenging. And I think it's because of our culture and the kind of company that I want us to be, that we're super family friendly. We're super encouraging for employee growth. I think we're a good place to work for middle-level managers and engineers and professionals, and we have a fun product, right? So we're making engines for hobbyists, and they're enjoying the fun thing.
All right, well, let's get into that fun product. You guys, you create your block, you build everything. It sounds like, I mean, majority of the stuff's in house, and yeah, go Blueprint. Tell us about it.
So in that transition from engine rebuilding to Blueprint, there was in the beginning it was probably just a rebuilt engine with a better cam in it. And then it got to be a rebuilt engine with a better cam and somebody else's heads. And then it got to be with a stroker crank. And ultimately, uh, two things happened. One, the availability of good rebuildable engine blocks did not match our volume because we needed 30 or 40 a day. And then the other thing, we wanted to build a better product and have more control over the supply chain for the crank and the heads and the rods. So we started hiring designers, design engineers, and we started hiring consultants who were specialists in camshafts or specialists in cylinder heads or whatever. And we literally just slowly, one piece at a time, designed every part for every engine that we make. We got the outside help we needed from consulting people to say, what should the metallurgy be on this crankshaft? What should the heat treat be on this crankshaft? What should the hardness be? And so we spec all that because we had somebody that would teach us. And now, so we have drawings for every part. Every part has the dimensional, the specs, and we go into the global supply chain and we typically end up buying crankshafts from a crankshaft manufacturer. They could be in China or they could be in Europe or they could be anywhere. But when we come out with a new engine and quote a crank, that's how we go to market. So uh, with engine blocks and heads, we design those. We maintain control over the design. We're not a foundry, right? So we can do machining, but we don't pour molten metal. So we work with foundries globally, and like our engine blocks come from a foundry in Germany. The German foundry is an OEM foundry. They make blocks for Ford and GM and Volkswagen and lots of other people, and super high quality stuff. We bring in raw castings by the container load, and we do the machining here. And that's really nice because, from the time we put a raw casting into a machine until that engine's running on the dyno could be a week. And
Wow.
so it really helps with the quality control if something isn't just quite right or whatever. And there's no question, Ronnie, that there's a cost savings for us, but it takes a lot of investment to get to the cost savings part, right? We've got about $10 million in CNC equipment. We've got $6 to $8 million in casting and foundry tooling just for engine blocks. If we want a new rod, we're going to spend probably 40 grand on tooling to make a forging die for a connecting rod. So, but I like doing that because it gives us control over the quality. My quality engineering team has direct access to the quality engineers in those factories that are making those components. And we go visit those factories. And if we have problems, we're not talking to a sales guy. We're talking to the engineers, and we can really get on top of things.
Well, I mean, just to think, and part of that has to be when you talk about the investment, the millions in machining equipment, is that R&D at the beginning, anyways. That's got to be a little bit of a leap of faith, or at one point was, because you're saying, hey, we don't have enough to meet the demand. We need to create our own. And it's not like the OE's handing you the specs on all this stuff, right? So you're spending
No,
the money, and you are blueprinting those motors and those blocks, and that's got to be at one point, not now maybe, but at one point you're sitting in a board meeting saying, hey, I got to spend a shit ton of money to get to where I want to be.
there's no board meeting. The board meeting is every morning when I look in the mirror. But yeah, you're exactly right. It's like you just look at the volume and say, can we hump it? And not just today's volume, but what's the volume going to be in 5 years? So yeah, you got to have some confidence and some belief in what you're doing. But I think the main thing is I have really just reinvested about everything this company makes back into the company.
Yeah, and that's the success right there, the belief, the testimonial. Do you think so? One of the things you said, I love this quote, was that we don't really, at one point we had people that could rebuild and reman a motor, and in a transition, like you said, we thought, hey, it might take a year. Now it took 3 years, but you've had that pivot to the point where you're going to be hard pressed to find somebody who could probably rebuild a motor versus build a motor now.
Oh, you mean like internally skill set?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's different. There's a few of us old guys that have been around here long enough to have all those experiences. But yeah, a lot of the new guys don't. They don't know what we know how to do. Uh, I have a 17-year-old grandson, and I've got a 1970 Bronco. And last winter, our project was going to be to pull that 302 out and rebuild it, right? The easy answer is go get a 302 out of the inventory and stick a blueprint engine in it. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to get it out, take it down, show him how much is enough wear or too much wear and how to look at things. I wanted to teach him all that. Unfortunately, that whole project got sidetracked when he got a girlfriend. So now I have a Bronco in my shop that's like half tore apart, and I have a grandson showing up at the house with his girlfriend. So that's okay. That's life in the fast lane. But
But
yeah, the actual, how an engine works and all that we learned, I think when we were rebuilding engines, we did over 300,000 engines, and you learn a lot from that. And that knowledge is just fantastic going forward into developing these blueprint engines, because you're always pulling back on something you learned 25 years ago that, well, we tried that once and here's what happened. It's still not going to work or whatever. Even though the engine's new today and it wasn't then, the knowledge base is fantastic. And there's quite a few people here in a leadership role, like my engineering manager uh, runs design engineering, runs engine validation and calibration and testing, and also manages our quality control. Started out like 26 years ago grinding cranks. So he knows what a good crank looks like. And we've got other guys like that that have been here for a long time that have both experiences.
Have you ever thought about doing, or do you do any team building where you get guys and you're like, hey, we're gonna do, we're gonna have the engineering department compete against the assembly guys, and we're gonna build two cars, or we're gonna build two trucks, or we're gonna be two race cars, and we're gonna have some team building, and at the same time they'll simultaneously be learning other things because of that, and just the fun that would be. Because I really love the example of, hey, we can either rebuild this 302 in this Bronco, or we can go, you can just, we're such a pluck it off the shelf society now, whether
Right.
it's Amazon or, and I hate to, it's kind of a throwaway society. You made a living off of a throwaway society when people were just parking their old trucks and hey, look at this motor. Hey, let's rebuild this. So a lot of different things going on there, but yeah, you guys could really have some fun there.
Yeah, I got to admit that's the first time I've heard that suggestion, but yeah, I think there is some things there we could do to celebrate the sport, celebrate the hobby, and get people engaged. A lot of our employees are really engaged. Like we have a car show here in July. And lots of performance companies have car shows in their parking lot. And I think that's a freaking awesome idea. But we have a car show in July, and we invite all of our employees to bring whatever they want to show off. And of course, we have other people come. And I think this year it's not huge. We might have had 150 cars or something, but I enjoy most seeing the employee cars and seeing their projects and what they're working on, because they're coming to work every day making the engines for those vehicles, and then they're going home and working on their own. And that's really cool. I've got a design engineer, the guy that does our water jacketed parts, our blocks and heads, is building a factory 5 Cobra in his garage at home. And 2 or 3 years ago, we finally were able to launch our brand new 302 Ford engine block instead of using a used engine block. He's got number one in his Cobra. He designed it. We got the tooling made. We made the casting. We machined it, assembled it up into an engine, tested it, gave it to him. So he's got the number one block that he designed in his Cobra. So people get to do those kind of fun things here.
Yeah, what a fun, from the beginning to the end. And when they're wrenching, they go home. They're wrenching at work and they're wrenching at home. You got the right guys that are collecting that check. So that's a passion that's not just it's on the clock and off the clock.
Yeah, it really helps. We've asked the question, and every company asks the question, can you bring people into your company that are not obviously enthusiasts in the industry? And everybody will tell you, oh yeah, yeah, you can get good people. They don't have to be enthusiasts, but it sure works a lot better if they are, because
Yeah.
they just start with an understanding of what we're trying to do and who our customer is. We don't have to teach them that.
Do you ever get people, and I don't mean this disrespectfully because you're at the top, but you seem like you're a guy that's mingling around, that gets to know the people. In the fire department, we get young kids and they think they want to be a firefighter because they, grew up thinking that. But then they get in and they get in the culture and they're like, "Oh my God, I want to be part of this." Do you get people, I assume that they're like, "Oh, I'm just gonna, I kind of like motors," or whatever it might be. And then they get into that culture, they get into that blueprint culture, and they're like, wow. And I mean, you might have a guy like that now that you could think of as 10, 15 years, or a gal, and it's like, hey, this is the culture. I love the people, I love the product, and I love what we're doing out there, because we're taking people's really hard-earned money, and they want to buy from us. They want to have that motor, and that's a feeling of accomplishment to know that you're wrenching and working and building on something that people really want.
We do have a strong culture. We've nicknamed it the Blue Crew, or Bleeding Blue. We talk about Bleeding Blue, and I'll ask one of my managers, says, "Hey, what about Sarah over there? She's been here for 6 months. Tell me about Sarah." And it's like, she bleeds blue. She's on the team. She's one of us. So there really is a culture of one of us. And we try hard to have people feel welcome into that, right? Because you show up here and there's already this clique of people that are just avid Blueprint employees and leaders. And we don't want anybody to feel unwelcome in that. We need them to feel welcome. We want them to become part of us, because we can finish each other's sentences and we know what's going on. They understand me. They understand what's gonna come out of my mouth next. They already know. So
Good.
it's a pretty smooth machine that way. A lot of working together.
Well, and I think when you think about like, I still get magazines, or obviously we talked a little bit about social media, but when somebody sees that blueprint ad, they need to know. And one of the things you've said before is people just want it to start, and they want it to run, and they don't want to have problems. Because just like you had mentioned with the rebuild side of things, people are obviously they're building new motors. The hobbyist, the enthusiast is the same way. So whether somebody's building a factory 5 Cobra with the first 302, somebody's building an old Chevy truck, somebody's building a Bronco, somebody's building a Blazer, they want to be able to buy with confidence and know that it's going to start and that it's going to run. And we often joke about the New Balance wearing jean short carburetor tuner guy, because now people don't want to deal with that. They don't have the time, and they don't have the confidence, and they want to buy a motor. They want it to run and start and be very reliable.
You're exactly right. And, we just try to keep up. You got to go look. You got to go look at what's going on in the marketplace. I love going to car shows, love going to car auctions to see what's going on and what people are doing, talking to the people that are building the cars. I'll relate a story, Ronnie. Probably 5 years ago, maybe 6 or 7 even. I'm sitting in a duck blind in the middle of wintertime. I've got my manufacturing engineering manager. I've got my engineering manager and a couple other guys that I work with. And we're talking about pulley kits. And we're talking about, should we be putting pulley kits on these motors? And I'm like, my manufacturing engineering manager, his name is Josh, and he builds cars as a hobby for people. And I'm like, Josh, you're like an ace mechanic. I mean, do you really want me to put the pulley kit on the motor? I mean, you know how to do that. And he's like, I don't want to do it. It's a waste of time. You should do that. I'm like, really? People will pay us to do that? And he's like, oh, yeah. So, that was kind of one step in realizing what you're talking about, that today's car builder is looking for kind of an elegant solution. He's not, especially if we sell to a consumer and we sell them a long block and it's got a carburetor on it. Uh, we've said, you go figure out how to hook up the throttle. You go figure out what the linkage is. You figure out how the return spring attaches. They don't want to do all that. They want to buy all that. They want that solution. So there is an effort on our part, and we didn't invent it. Everybody's getting it figured out, but people want to hook up a couple wires and a few bolts and be done. And so we do more and more development that way. A couple years ago, we came out with engine and transmission combos. And unlike our competitors, we don't ship them loose. We ship them assembled. We assemble the transmission, whether it's a stick shift or an automatic. If it's a stick shift, we sweep in the dowel pins. We put offset dowels in. We make sure that clutch is centered on that flywheel. We make sure everything's perfect and put it in a great big box and ship it out. And that guy just needs to install it then, which is really what he wanted to do. You talked about music being delivered with 8-track. And for me, it started with vinyl. So I'm a generation ahead of you. But the fun thing to do and the necessary thing to do on Saturday afternoon was go walk around in the junkyard trying to find the parts you needed to bolt an alternator on. I don't have to do that anymore. It's a lot easier than it used to be.
Yeah, and there's not that many 15-year-old Norrises running around, or a 25-year-old Norris. I mean, my son is one of those guys. He wants to do it the hard way. And boy, I could say this, you could just buy this like this, and he'll say, "No, I don't want to," because he does have the passion and the knowledge, but he loves the challenge of figuring it out. But he also doesn't really have the money. So
Yep.
so you have the time when you don't have the money, and then when you get a little older, you might have the money, and you don't really have the time. And it is therapeutic either way. People just don't realize the journey of going to the junkyard, finding that alternator bracket or whatever you're missing. That's few and far between now. I mean, we still have junkyards and love it. God damn, they get picked over so fast. It's hard to keep up for the good stuff. But you guys are now manufacturing the good stuff. And it's like, hey, I can just spend the time, or I should say, spend the money. And I try to tell my son that. And we try to tell the audience that, hey, you can buy this chassis. It's already done. You can buy from Blueprint. You can get it all done. And it comes, and it's kind of like a Lego set. When we were kids, you just put it together, and you have a good time with it and make sure it's going to run. So I think from the business perspective, the more you can do that, obviously the better. And you've seen the fruits of that labor from the perspective of, hey, it's plug and play. You're ready to rock, ready to roll.
It's really simple, Ronnie. We're just trying to sell people what they want to buy. We're not we're not trying to tell them what they want to buy. We're asking and seeking information, and sometimes uh, by far the easiest thing you can do that people don't do very well is listen. And just go out and talk to the customers, see what they're buying. Why'd you buy that? Well, I wanted this. Okay. Well, what if that don't work right? Well, it'll be okay. I still want it. It's like, okay, the guy wants it. We do things here that sometimes are more aesthetic than they are functional. Uh, but people want it to look a certain way, right? And I do make the distinction that our engines are intended for classic restorations. They're not racing engines. We do have engines that are used in racing. Like you make an 825 horsepower big block Chevy, that's a pretty nice bracket motor. And we have guys that use them and beat the crap out of them all day long in bracket racing. But the market that we study isn't racing. I'm not saying that won't change in the future, but as a matter of fact, show up at PRI and see what we're doing. But uh, we study the classic car restoration market and the resto mod market and all that to see what the people want.
Yeah, well, like you said, they are the people that are going to be the consumer, and they want that plug and play availability. I think GM, for example, obviously the blue oval as well. People, they really are. The OE is really saying, hey, we realize that you want to buy these motors. Do you compete, or do you consider yourself, or is it challenging to compete against the OEs because they have that name recognition, and sometimes what goes with that is a level of confidence and reliability, and you as I guess a competitor, or a reman, or not reman, but somebody who's goes against and says, okay, we build these performance motors, but do you feel like that is challenging?
It's absolutely a challenge when you bring your banker in for the annual meeting and review what's going on, and you explain to him that your main competition is General Motors. They kind of notice that you're up against a big Goliath dude, right? Um, so we just have to do better at some things that they can't do better at. So you're not going to buy a Ford style product from General Motors. You're not going to buy a Gen 3 Hemi style motor from General Motors. I think our service and our support of the customer after the sale is it has to be better than General Motors, because it's just it's as good as we can make it. It's fantastic. Our program is that we always have a happy customer. Uh, and because of how GM distributes their products, you could, ultimately they go through car dealerships. They're mega dealerships. They sell a lot of motors, but it is going through a car dealership. And if it's not, it's going through distribution that bought it from a car dealership. So we maintain the service part. Even if we sell through Summit or Jegs or whatever, we really want the service after the sale, and we want to take care of the customer. We want him calling us if there's questions or problems or issues. So I do think we're better at that than anybody else in the marketplace. And it's a key metric. It's something we look at every week. It's something we talk about. Uh, we want to be 4.9 or 5.0.
Well, exactly the same perspective of knowing that the customer, we have to educate the customer that not only they're going to get something that's going to run, that's going to start, that's going to be backed up, but a buddy of mine said this once, and I want to make sure I say it politically correct, but who would have ever thought we would miss the days of getting somebody overseas to talk to, because now we're getting AI. So you can't even get somebody to talk to nowadays. And,
Yeah.
and you think back, 5 years ago, and you got somebody and you're like, okay, I'm struggling to understand what this is going on, but it was Best Buy hotline or something. And now if you're going to get somebody that's going to be there, that's going to talk you through it, that's going to work you through, that is a big thing for the customer to know. Hey, if you're going to get a 4.9, you're going to get as good as GM can build it, and you're going to get the support that goes along with it we need you, the customer, to understand that.
Yeah, we just, especially in the day of the internet and how people can become haters so easily. We just want to do everything we can to take care of people. I actually have had customers call me or reach out through LinkedIn or whatever who have had a problem, had it resolved, and want to know, hey, I was talking to Ken on the phone and he helped me with this problem. What's Ken's favorite restaurant? I want to send him a gift card. I'm like, okay, good. Yes, Ken made you happy. That's what we wanted. So that's happened more than once.
And exactly. I mean, you've been on the other line. You've been that guy that's called up and has tried to get a hold of somebody, and maybe there's a language barrier. And now it's AI. In the last year, I can't get a hold of any. I mean, social media, you can't get a hold of anybody from Meta, right? So if they can get a hold of Ken, they are so happy to send him a gift card, Total Wine. I want to buy that guy a beer. I want to buy that guy a hamburger. And I wonder someday if that'll ever come back. I doubt that it does with the computer technology that we have, but I guess it doesn't really need to come back because it hasn't went anywhere with Blueprint. And that's something that's very important that we need to make sure that people understand that there's a level of customer service that you're going to get to talk to somebody, and that somebody, if Ken doesn't know, Ken's going to go talk to Marty and Marty's going to know. So either way, we're going to get you to that person, and there's a value there.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not super down on that. I just think the internet has made it so companies cannot hide. You just can't suck at customer service because the internet is going to expose you and there's just going to be too many stories about you doing a poor job. So I'm optimistic that we're kind of all forced to behave, and not just us, but everybody else. If they want to have a successful business, they got to have happy customers. I think it's an improvement. Whereas you used to be able to hide behind it. Like, I've
Okay.
never heard of that before.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're the
Yeah.
only one. We've never had that call. You're the only one that's ever had that problem. We've never heard of that before. Click. Hey, that was the 12th one today I had, shit like that.
Yeah. What is something that comes through the hotline a lot?
No, I think the the biggest interaction that we have with the customer after the sale is, and it kind of goes to what you're saying about the completeness of the product, is they just want to know what else to use. Which flywheel, which balancer, what spark plugs, and we try to provide all that information to them, but we've come to the conclusion they really like talking to people because they got a manual with the engine that says all that, right? And then as far as actual challenges or warranty kind of issues, I don't know that there's one that pops up as the biggest. I would say the the engines that we sell that are carbureted with distributors have obviously more problems than the engines we sell that have EFI and maybe lock timing or whatever, because the customer's ability to tune that and adjust that is not what it used to be. And uh, it's hard to overcome. So our answer is let's just move towards more EFI. It's going to be a good experience for the customer. Carburetors do need jetted. We're at 2,300 feet altitude here. When we buy carburetors from Holly, it looks like the same carburetor everybody else buys, but it's our part number and it has jets in it for our elevation so that when we dyno test it, it runs good. But I don't know what the elevation is going to be where the guy installs it, right? It's going to go from my warehouse to Summit's warehouse to somebody in Florida or somebody in Colorado. I mean, so it just, it's just like, yeah, you really got to tinker with this stuff, and people don't want to tinker anymore and they don't know how. And that's
Yeah.
cool. We have a solution. It's called EFI.
Have you seen a do you really start to see that change where when you're looking at your data, you're looking at your sales and you're seeing that, hey, we're really slowing down on carbs, or are you surprised that people are still buying carbs distributors? Where does that lie?
It's still a lot of carburetors. So one of the things that we've been doing internally is developing, taking an ECM that's not currently in the marketplace that we use on industrial engines. That is an extremely robust ECM, and we buy in significant quantities. And we've been building up a few engines with that and port fuel injection. And it's really just still a cost barrier where um, even throttle body injection system is going to cost on an engine. It's going to make the engine cost quite a bit more than a carburetor. And so I understand completely that people want to spend their hard-earned dollars carefully, but I'd really like to drive the cost together so that it's not such a big delta between EFI and a carburetor, because I know the customer experience is going to be better with EFI.
It's one of those things where I wonder if you could do a survey with those guys, how many would spend the extra money after they got it home, and then they said, okay, I wish I would have got the EFI, I wish I would have got the throttle body, I got the carb, I went that way, I thought that was, that's old school, I wanted that look, I wanted this, and then now I kind of changed my mind. I think it probably would be more than not. And like you said, if you can get that delta together or get people to understand, again, so much of business is trying to explain to people to understand, hey, we want you to have this EFI. We want you to have less problems. We want you to have the start, the run, the reliability. And you might be surprised you're gonna get that with this motor or this package.
Yeah. So I think today, it's just a choice. We have both. You can buy probably about any of our engines with either a carburetor or an EFI system, and there's a delta on the price, and so the customer makes a choice. So my goal would be to drive down that delta and get EFI and carburetors. I don't know. I don't know if it's $150 on a $5,000 engine. If you get it down to $150, maybe they'll just pick EFI every time. It you don't have to match the price, but I don't think they'll do it for $400 more. They won't pay 400 more for EFI if they're agnostic, right? Some people want EFI, but if it's an agnostic fuel system guy and he really doesn't care, I think 400 is probably too much delta. So we got to just keep trying to take cost out of EFI and maybe make a little less money on the engine and help the customer be able to make that choice.
Yeah. Yeah, what a good point. So for the audience, what you guys offer, the big three, obviously. You offer a little bit of everything. And if I remember correctly, about a year ago you were really working on some LS stuff. Where's that? Where are you at with all that?
So we rely heavily on the OEM supply chain for the GM LS style platform, and there's quite a bit of General Motors content in it, and we buy that from dealerships like everybody else. But when GM came out with the LS engine, in the early 2000s, 2000 whatever it was, they did something that had never I'd never seen before, and that was the engine was actually fantastic, and they sold the parts for the engine really inexpensively. So a lot of the aftermarket said, we really can't make better heads than the LS3 heads. Maybe a little bit better, but they're really, really good. And that LS3 aluminum block was really, really good, plenty good for what it did. GM sold it really inexpensively. So us, like a lot of other companies that were engaged in building LS engines, we just made it out of GM parts because they're awesome parts and you can get them and all that. But now that the LS3 style engine is no longer a production vehicle engine, those parts are not as available. So we had a lot of supply chain challenges getting enough parts to build those engines, and everybody has, right?
Sure.
I don't care who it is. I mean, we talk to our dealers that we buy it from, and they can look online and say there's 12 of those blocks in stock in the whole country. Like, okay, well, I need 20 of them, so that doesn't work. So we've started making the investment to build our version, and we just are wrapping that up or launching it now. I would say, Ronnie, we do have an LS GM style block that we are having made. The foundries again in Germany. We're machining it. We're just starting in July and August. We're just starting to build engines with it. So that's gonna give us some freedom there, and we'll still use the GM parts where we can. Our block will be iron. We'll offer an aluminum version that will still be a genuine GM block. So we'll have a choice, but we just can't get enough of the aluminum blocks. So we had to choose to make that. And there's lots
So
of other people that have that block, but we needed it in quantity.
so you're gonna have the blueprint iron block, but you're gonna buy the actual GM aluminum block. still.
Yep. So we'll supply the engine both in iron and aluminum, and the customers have never had a problem with the our version of that being a GM block. I think there's a lot of respect for the GM engineering and what they made there. I know there's some horsepower constraints if you put a big blower on it, but it's a good block, and we'll see where we end up. We'll offer both.
Does anybody else do that? Do you have other, competition or people, or do you work together with people when you're like, hey, we're gonna go to, we're gonna manufacture our own LS iron block. Anybody else buy from us, or do you work with other companies? Uh,
Well, what we do in the early stages is we work with people that have the potential to use it or would like to use it. And in this case, I would stop short of saying we partnered, but we had several meetings with some race shops that use it in professional racing, not sportsman racing. And they've got choices today between the LSX or Dart or the factory block or whatever. So there's several versions of it out there already. And what we want to understand is what are the features that are important to people, what matters, and what's kind of in our bailiwick and what's too far outside of our bailiwick. Like we chose not to make a super high deck version of that block because we just don't have a need for it. Uh, it's a niche market. There are some super high decks and they sell them and people build great big 500 cubic inch motors out of them. But we said that's too much additional tooling. It complexes it. It makes every common engine we make cost more because we created this extra tooling at the foundry to be able to do this deck size. So we'll look at what's available and then we talk to people. It's like, what are you using for features on that? Like we talked to this race shop and they didn't use the GM style piston oiling because they said that hangs out there, that little steel tube um, hangs out there, and that tube will fall off in a race car. It's like, okay, so I wanted to put that piston oiling in, and I thought that would be important to you, but it's not. And he said, no, we don't. That's not how we do it. We do it a different way. I said, okay, so we try to get good information so that what we're making is kind of the industry's accumulated knowledge of what the best is. And that's our launch point. Those guys are meeting with my designers and my engineering manager, and we're saying we want this feature. We're not going to do this feature. We're not going to do displacement on demand because we don't need that or whatever.
Well, and you get so much information there. I got to think it's almost overload. But if you go back to the 350, to the 454, to the LS block, you've got years and years of experience and saying, hey, we're going to build the best, most universal, customer demanded motor from what we've learned from, history and the past.
Yeah, and then we're always careful, Ronnie, in our promotional literature and how we talk to people. We're not making engines for General Motors. The engines we make are not General Motors engines. They're not Chevrolet engines. They are similar to or something like that. And we do end up changing them also. We add and change and adjust some features that the OEM never did have because the marketplace wants it, or maybe to consolidate some parts or whatever. Uh, for example, we make both a small block and a big block style Chevrolet engine that have for EFI use a 58X reluctor. And I think the most uh, points that the General ever put on a small block was a 4X. We have 58 teeth. So we do some things to kind of modernize the engine and be able to accomplish something down the road that maybe that old design that GM stopped making in 1998 or 2000 didn't have. And we'll put some 2010 features in it. Uh, so like we do have piston oiling on our small block and big block style engines, where GM never had piston oiling. We do that every day.
Do you find that going to the trade shows, I got to think PRI is your biggest one, but I know you guys have a real busy, whoever runs your social media posted it the other day, but just the calendar coming up. I mean, from the Triple Crown to Dino's to SEMA to PRI, you guys got a lot going on. Do you find that that's the best place to interact with the customer? So they're going to hear it, on C10 Talk, on F100 Talk. They're going to hear different things about Norris and Blueprint, but they're going to have those concerns and they can get that one-on-one when they go out to shows, PRI included. Where do you find that your best interaction is with the customer?
I think, my sales guys might have a different opinion, but I think the best interaction is probably the retail shows like the Good Guy events that we go to, or Dino's, or the Triple Crown, or even the Barrett Jackson auction in Scottsdale. Is we're talking to people there that are using the engines, they're building cars, they're looking to build cars. That's really valuable. So SEMA is a big show for us. It's the most expensive show we do, and we have two booths there, and we'll do a lot of good at SEMA. But it's mostly, SEMA's a B2B, so we're mostly talking to people that are going to take our engine and sell it to somebody else, right? And those are really valuable relationships. But those companies are just like me; they just want to sell the guy what he wants to buy. So I want to talk to the guy that wants to buy it. A good friend of mine is Scooter Brothers, and Scooter's a generation or two older than me. Scooter was one of the founding guys at Comp Cams back in the 80s when I was getting started. Comp Cams was getting started. And Scooter always told me, your customer, he said, for a camshaft guy, he said, my customer is the guy that throws the box away. It's not Summit or Jags or Speedway Motors. It's the guy who throws the box in the trash. That's the guy I'm trying to make happy. And I think that's right. And I think the good distribution customers we have know that they're just a middleman. They're trying to provide good service. But at the end of the day, that guy that's got the car in the garage at home that's working on it, he's the one that tells you what you really need to make. So that's the
Yeah.
one I want. That's the guy I want to get to.
Yeah, he's the end, right? What a great analogy. The guy that's gonna look at those instructions, throw that box in the trash. What's some big changes that you see on the horizon? Obviously, from the ICE engines to the electric world that we see. Do you feel like there's going to be a lot of changes there, or are we going to kind of stay
Well,
tight for a while?
probably more sit tight. I think there will be changes to BEVs, battery electric vehicles. But I think 2 years ago, there was a huge fervor about it. And there was regulation that was passed by the EPA a year and a half ago that would require 65% of all new vehicles sold by 2032 or whatever to be battery electric. And the manufacturers mostly geared up to try to accomplish those stepped goals that end in 2032, but the customers didn't show up. So I think last year we saw the manufacturers make a lot more BEVs, but they found out nobody wants to buy them. And now, through my involvement with SEMA, the trade show organization or the trade organization, I'm kind of privy to a lot of political activity, which I love. SEMA has a fantastic office in DC that is doing so much behind the scenes for its members. It's unbelievable. We're terrible at telling the story, but they're really doing a lot. But anyway, a few weeks ago, the Supreme Court threw down or threw out what's known as the Chevron doctrine. And the Chevron doctrine came from, I don't know, wherever in the 80s, that said basically the authority on science is the regulatory agency. And if the regulatory agency like EPA says this is what we need to do, there is no authority that could challenge that. And that got thrown out by the Supreme Court. So now uh, everybody that's managed in some way by a regulatory agency is dreaming of the lawsuits that are going to go to push back on regulations that are not fair. I don't care if you're talking about the car industry and EPA or if you're talking about the bank industry and bank regulations. All those industries are excited now that they can push back on regulatory overreach. So, what we don't know is where this ends up. We know the regulations are on the books that we got to have 65% of all new cars be battery electric. We know from last year's experiment that the consumers don't really want to buy them. And now we also know that those regulations are probably going to get nullified. The guy that I wonder about is the car maker. It's the Farleys and Mary Barras. It's like, what do you, how do you guys decide what you're going to make when it's so ambiguous and it's so unsure? And in some ways, that's been good for us because we deal in niche markets, and the engines that we compete against at GM and Ford are the extra engines that they have left over from production. And I would imagine at GM and Ford, they don't know how many extra engines they have anymore because they don't know how many electric F-150s they're going to make compared to 5-liter F-150s. So it's got to be really challenging for them to figure out what to make. Uh, and we just dabble in the niches. So I think it's good for us because we don't have a choice. We're just going to make engines. So if there's confusion about how many engines Ford and GM need to make, it probably helps us.
I mean, the government regulation on that and the GM and the big three, and I guess more than that, even now, with Toyota and really getting ahead of GM and Ford when it comes from that perspective. But it's got to be just the pathway for them is so challenging to say, okay, well, yeah, we have to have we have no infrastructure and we have to have all EV by this time. I heard you say it. Toyota's like spot on. What hybrid, 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 hybrid? Why we don't have more hybrid to have that transition over the next 20 to 30 years so that the infrastructure can be built up. I mean, we're sitting back here in the grandstands just laughing. There's no infrastructure, there's brownouts, and people can't, they have to park every 150 to 350 miles so that they can charge up. When if we had a hybrid, we would see that transition.
You're preaching to the choir. It's a real lack of planning. I think a Boy Scout troop could do a better job of planning this deal because we're cutting back on fossil fuel energy, which is fine. I'm not in favor of poisoning our environment, but we're not replacing it with anything that's reliable. So we're going to increase the energy demand for electricity while we're decreasing our ability to produce it. And then if you read about AI, if we ever really get any traction with AI, it takes a ton of electricity. So there's just these divergent goals that don't align and won't work. And at the same time, uh, because we get to hang out with some pretty smart people in our industry, there's a lot you can do to clean up an engine yet. There's a lot you can do to make an ICE engine clean. And I always tell my grandkids, it's like my engines don't create any pollution, zero. Now the fuel they burn does, but you can burn hydrogen, you can burn renewable natural gas, which is cleaner than electric. You can burn synthetic propane, which is super, super clean. So I really think the development needs to be on the fuel side and keep working on the engine, but it's the fuel that will fix it. We can fix it with fuel and get a really low carbon footprint. And then I live out here in farm country where we, of course, support ethanol. And the thing about ethanol that people don't think about is ethanol comes in our world from corn. And in order to grow the corn, you have to absorb the carbon first. So we absorb carbon into the plant. The plant dies. One way or another, it's going to release the carbon. In the case of ethanol, it's through the tailpipe. And then we take the carbon and we grow more corn with it. So the real devil, if carbon is the devil, is the carbon that comes from deep into earth that was sequestered and buried that we turn into fuel and then we release it into the atmosphere where we're creating additional carbon. But like with ethanol, we're not creating any additional carbon. That's why it's carbon neutral. And I wish it had a little better traction. And I wish people understood that it's like, hey, there's no new carbon added to the atmosphere from ethanol, and it really is efficient. And it's sustainable, and we have it. So I think sometimes we forget about what we have and what we don't have.
Well, and again, it's whether it's propaganda or marketing, but when you think of what it takes to mine and create electric vehicles, you look at the big picture there and what's happening at other countries. And when we tend to rely on other countries, we tend to not get along 20, 30 years later, and we have wars and so on and so forth. So when the consumer doesn't realize what it takes to build an electric vehicle based on that mining, there's a lot bigger carbon footprint than people to the world than people realize.
That's right. I think it was May of 23 when these new regulations came out from the EPA. And one of the things they did in May of 23, they said, okay, in 2012, the EPA established a law or a regulation that vehicle manufacturers had to consider the entire footprint for making the vehicle. Ever since 2012, they suspended it. They never, ever did it. And finally, in 2023, they eliminated it completely, and the measurement became only the tailpipe on highway. So, how disingenuous is that, Ronnie? That we're not going to look at what it takes to make the vehicle and make the batteries, and we're not going to look at what it takes to dispose of it. We're only going to compare tailpipe emissions. All we did with the current regulations is move the emission from the highway to the power plant. We didn't clean up anything.
Well, we actually made it worse the way I look at it. But at the end of the day, that puts the stress on the manufacturer, and it puts, it does put I guess the pressure on them. And like we talked about, it's hard for them to figure out what they're going to do. But I think you're right. People will pivot over the next 15 years. We'll see some changes. And obviously we have a big election coming up. So there'll be some different changes. And what can happen, what will happen, obviously society, just like you with your grandkids, you want to make it so we have a place to live and we can, continue to enjoy like you said, the Chevron rule was a huge change for us, but we're not trying to kill our planet. We want to live on our planet and we want to make things better for the future. But at the same time, we need to open up our eyes and see what's really happening. I always laugh with R12 or whatever it might be from the Freon perspective, because I'm in Arizona. You go down to Mexico and things are completely different. And it's like the ozone doesn't give two shits about what's happening in Mexico versus what's happening in the United States. Just because we want to sleep better at night, that's one thing. But we need to be from the global perspective and understand what's going on. And we're all just trying to do the best that we can. We're the pioneers on this.
I would even say, Ronnie, you and I just want to use good science, and neither one of us are scientists, but it's so obvious when you don't look at the whole life cycle of the car that you're not looking at good science. It's like that. Come on, even we can figure that out without having a PhD.
Yeah. Yeah. And what it takes to manufacture a car. I'm still driving my '07 classic Duramax around 210,000 miles, and I have no intentions of it stopping. I love that truck. And to think that I've got a truck that I'm still driving that's, coming up on 20 years, and I probably could get 30 years out of it without a doubt, and like you say, back in the old days, guys weren't pushing over 100,000 miles. Let me take you out with this. If you could build any motor and you could build any car, any truck, anything, what would you build?
Well, Ronnie, when I was a small boy, I had a Hot Wheels set, and was a, in that Hot Wheels set was a red Ford GT supercar. And I remember you could open up the back end of it and see the motor in the back. And that's kind of always been my favorite car. So I really like the 2005 and 6 versions that Ford made. And what I'd really like to do, and I think we'll do it sometime, is we'll find one of those that's not the best in class, but something that, maybe has got some miles on it. And I'd like to put one of our 427 pushrod motors in it. With stacked injection, 8-stack injection, and or a supercharger. And I know the purists are going to go crazy if we do that, if we take that 2006 red Ford and pull out the Ford engine, but that would be my favorite car. I love looking at cars. I love going to car shows, but I don't feel compelled to have a bunch of them. I admire the craftsmanship. So there's really only one that I would like to have, and it's that one.
Have you bought it? Have you gotten the car yet or no?
I've registered for the auctions. I've taken my wife to the Barrett Jackson auctions. We've sat there and watched it go in front of us. And she's like, raise your hand, raise your hand. I'm like, I don't want it that bad yet. I need to want it more. So come close. We'll do
Unfortunately,
it.
I don't think they're going down. I think
No,
you're
they're
gonna.
not going to go down. They're not going to go down.
Well, you only live once, Norris. So let's make it happen because I think the whole world would be happy if Norris got what he wanted, and you've provided a lot of want for other people, or a lot of happiness for a lot of people, whether you realize it or not. And I think as the end user, the consumer, that's something that you not don't necessarily acknowledge, but it's an extension and it's far out there. Somebody might buy something from like you said, Summit or Jags, and that's their red GT. That's their, I just got this blueprint that I saved all my hard-earned money for.
That's really cool. And, I got to admit, sometimes we lose track of that, and seeing the customer submissions and watching the YouTube videos when they open the package, and just realizing that one piece that we made at 10:30 this morning means so much to the customer. We kind of lose track of that sometimes. And it's fun to remember that. It's fun to see those videos and realize that's a big deal to this guy. He's been dreaming about this maybe his whole life.
Yeah,
We're,
that's his
we're,
red GT. And really, it is actually Christmas for an adult. It's Christmas morning when you got that bike, you got that Tonka, you got that, Star Wars, whatever it was, Evil Knievel. It doesn't matter. The Nintendo game set, that's as an adult, 35, 45, 55, 65. You just made somebody's Christmas morning when they made it, they earned it, they worked their ass off,
yep,
couple overtime shifts, saving up all that money. But at the end of the day, knowing that that's their red GT.
absolutely. We
Okay,
got to
I'm going to
remember
take
that.
you out. I wanted to just say this to the audience. Let's go to work. I just thought when you said that's what my dad says, that's what I say. I just, hey, what's your favorite movie? What book are you reading? I don't know. Let's just go to work. I just want to work. I want to get up every day. I want to have purpose, and I want to work. And I think that you're an old soul because you think about the greatest, quote unquote, greatest generation, and your dad, you alluded to, is still alive, correct?
No, actually, we lost Dad just in May.
Okay.
But
Oh,
he was
damn.
he was 86, and he had a great life, and I know that because he told me that in March. And so we have a lot of peace that he's in a better place, and he's back with his hot rod, and he's a young man again, and he's living the dream.
Well, you are an extension of that greatest generation. So sorry for your loss. But like you said, knowing that dad had a great life and lived to, 86, and you and that lineage and that farm boy and that 15-year-old is still in there rebuilding 302s and talking to people. And then the last thing you said that was just shows you the type of man that Norris is you're in a duck blind with some folks, and you said, um, that I work with. You didn't say that work for me. You said I work with these guys. I work with these guys. My hands, my brain, my wallet, whatever it might be. But a lot of guys are in the world we live in today. They're going to say, "Yeah, I'm out there duck hunting with some guys that work for me." But you said that I work with. So for that, to keep it simple, to keep the level of humility to a guy who's worth a lot of money, who's built a company from, up from nothing. We thank you for that. And if that to the audience doesn't make you want to buy a blueprint motor, I don't know what the hell will.
Well, I appreciate those kind words. I
You
really
got it.
do.
You got it.
Thank
I'd
you.
like to have you back on. To be honest with you, I got a hard out. I got a college kid. I got to take to college, but I'll work with Michael, and I want to hit a whole thing on Cummins Motors. But either way, I'll wrap this up. And if we can do this more in the future, I know you're a busy guy, but it was I could talk to you for hours on end.
Well, I'd be happy to come back, Ronnie.
All right, I'll do a takeout here, Norris. Mr. Norris Marshall, we can find him. If you guys are out there, you can find him on social media, all different platforms. He's got a great team. Check them all out. Norris, again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your ingenuity. And thank you for not only caring about our planet, but pushing our hobby forward in that passion and knowing that a blueprint is in creating that heartbeat and that soul for somebody's motor.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Remember, it's not the 8-track, it's not the vinyl, it's not the cassette, it's not the disc, it's not the MP3, it's the music we're listening to.
That's right.
Salute, brother. Thank you. Okay, we're done. Thank you.
Awesome. What are you
Yeah,
going
I
to do?